Boom, just like that. 7 more people.
That's awesome. Greg, what I was saying is my granddaughter's 3 months old, so she was born Christmas Eve.
It's super exciting. The first granddaughter?
No, second. Oh, first granddaughter. Yeah, my grandson is 2.
Okay,
So.
awesome.
Hello, everyone. I know we're going to get started in a few minutes. We're just giving everyone time to come into the meeting. We have over 70 people registered, so.
Mm-hmm.
Greg, are there some key events that are coming up in the world of pulses or keep it clean or anything like that?
Maybe a lot's kicking off on Keep It Clean. I'll touch on 2, but yeah, no, I think the first one that everyone should have on the radar, and again, we'll touch at the end, is like obviously this is the time of year where we do kick off the Keep It Clean program. So typically what comes with that is a webinar. I think it's scheduled for April 24th for this year.
Yeah.
And obviously that's one I'll have a slide at the end just to make sure that everyone's aware of it.
Awesome.
They're able to join in, but I've done my best to not duplicate too much information. So I definitely encourage everyone will be encouraged to go and sign up for that one too, because I'm not going to steal the show for everything in that one, but obviously will be a bit of overlap between what's discussed today and that webinar too.
Awesome. No, that's great. We'll probably give it another couple minutes and then we'll get started.
In the meantime, I should have asked this first, Myrna. How is your membership representation? Is it mainly in the West? Do you have members in the East? What's the breakdown, I guess?
Yeah, so currently it's mainly Manitoba West, and we have members in Ontario and members maybe 1 or 2 in the Atlantic provinces, but I have been contacting them. I think we've just dropped the ball a little bit sometimes with how we communicate with our members in the ag retail. So we're looking at rebuilding that part of the membership. And our retailers would be the largest percentage of members, and then we have suppliers, affiliates, and what's the other one? Independent consultants.
Oh, sweet. Okay, I didn't know that. Very, very relevant group. Really happy for this opportunity.
Yeah.
For now, I'm going to start sharing my screen and
Sure. I'll get started. Yeah. All right, so I want to thank everyone for coming today. I know we're going to have more people joining us as we go. We had a lot of great response to today's session. My name is Myrna Gaughan, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Agri-Retailers. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary, and with that, we've started these Connect sessions. So this is our 3rd one, and we're looking forward to having more throughout the year. So with that, I'm not sure what's on the next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about who that care team is right now. So we have Micah, you can see on the screen, as well as she's joined us today. She's our member relations communications manager. So if you're looking to have a conversation about membership or communications, whether it be our communicator magazine or our newsletter that goes out. We also have Grace Wedlake, who is our controller or accountant. She's been with CARE for 6 years. Lisa Siragusa, who set up today's meeting. She's our training and project coordinator. She's going to be with us briefly, but she is actually in China teaching some courses, so won't be staying the entire time due to the 12 our time difference. Tracy Shelton has joined our team also to do the convention management. So our big convention that we have each year, which is November 18th, 19th, and 20th in Saskatoon. And then Jordan Sisiwa, who you're going to hear from shortly. You can see there who our board of directors are. Not sure if any of them are on the call, but we do have 9 board of directors representing Ontario to BC. And so I actually talked about some of these things already, but yeah. So our 30th anniversary celebration will be November 18th to the 20th in Saskatoon, and we're looking forward to a great turnout. We had a really successful convention this past November, and bringing back a more robust trade show and some of the live auction and the gala awards banquet and all of those things. And then over to you, Jordan. So Jordan, as I mentioned before, is our marketing specialist as well as our operations member of our team. And so he's going to be taking it over from here.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Myrna. So today's session is going to be a 30-minute presentation followed by a 30-minute Q&A. Simply, I'll be watching for those questions, and we encourage a lot of participation. The reason that we do these is for the participation. Of course, we love that Greg has joined us today, and he's going to be giving us some great insights, but getting that feedback is a big part of what goes on. So be bold at the end of this and give us those questions. The session will be recorded, and after this will be sent via email. So that's an important part, and please feel free to share that with as many people as you know. Getting the word out about mitigating the risk of MRLs and non-compliance in export markets is something we do want to get out as far and wide as possible. And then lastly, please keep your microphone, and this is part of the same as if you're in a movie theater, keep your microphone on mute. We don't want to get any interruptions, but we do want those questions. So with that, allow me to introduce Greg Bartley, our guest today, our guest speaker today. He's the Director of Crop Protection and Crop Quality at Pulse Canada. Greg works to ensure the Canadian pulse industry benefits from, sorry, as I can't scroll down on my computer. It's always something with tech. There we go. Greg works to ensure that Canadian pulse industry benefits from innovative and affordable crop production technologies that contribute to a profitable and sustainable pulse industry in Canada. Greg has an MSc in plant science from the University of Manitoba, is a professional agronomist and a certified crop advisor. Prior to Pulse Canada, Greg coordinated the Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Growers On-Farm Network, a network of farmers conducting field-scale research trials on their own farm. Now from there, I'm going to stop sharing, and Greg, it is up to you to take it from there.
Perfect. Thanks, Jordan. I'll just get my screen ready for everyone. It's coming through okay? Perfect. Yeah, no. So really appreciate the opportunity. As Myrna alluded to, what enticed me so much about participating in today's discussion is the conversational aspect to this. So while I have a presentation, hopefully get some good information, what I'm really looking forward to is the questions, the feedback, the one-on-one type conversation we can have afterwards. As I feel like, issues such as this is in depth. There's a lot of moving parts to it. It's really hard maybe sometimes to fully appreciate everything that's going on or the implications, things like that. So really, please answer any question. There's nothing off limits. Really looking forward to an open conversation in terms of what that looks like. So as indicated today, we're going to talk about MRLs and what we can do to help mitigate the risk of MRLs and safeguard the market access of our Canadian pulse industry, but obviously lessons to the broader agriculture industry as a whole. So just a bit about Pulse Canada. If you're not familiar, Pulse Canada, we're the national association, but we represent both the growers, traders, and processors of Canadian pulses here in Canada. From a member perspective, our membership is based on, again, that grower from the growers aspect. So this is our provincial members, Saskatchewan pulse growers, Alberta pulse growers, Manitoba pulse and soybean growers, but also the Ontario bean growers in the Ontario province. We also represent the industry through the Canadian Pulse and Special Crops Trade Association. So that's where both the growers and processors come in. And then a lot of the work that we do is program based. So we do take advantage of the government programming to leverage, the dollars that we get from the growers and the trade to do a lot of work such as this as the crop protection files. Just touching quick on kind of the crops we represent. So obviously the pulses, everyone should be aware of, it's the peas, beans, lentils, chickpeas, but just wanted to highlight, through our partnership with the Canadian Pulse and Special Crops Trade Association, we do work on special crops as well from a trade aspect. So we do get questions on mustard and canary seed and things like that. And while they may not get the full attention that pulses do, it's still important to make sure that there's market access for these crops too. And, as staff at Pulse Canada, we do serve that staff function for the Canadian Pulse and Special Crops Trade Association as well. So if you see questions or MRLs or things like that on special crops, we get our hands in that too. So that being said, if you do have questions on these crops, we do take that as well. As far as where they're grown, not here to educate anyone. I think we're all aware of this, but just the representation that it is pulse, prairie focused. Within the prairies, the different pulse types do vary, so we take that into consideration. But also, again, that eastern representation within the dry bean industry too. So lots to consider in the pulse world as we're dealing with multiple crops, different regions, things like that.
Yeah.
I'll just try and mute you, Robin. Okay, I got her. So once we grow them in the prairies, obviously we're export dependent. So in 2024, this is the kind of the framework or the picture of where our pulse crops ended. You see the Indo-Pacific is by far the biggest consumer or the bigger taker of our pulses. This is consumed by India and China, the two largest markets by far. We do have importance within the EU, the US, all different markets. Obviously, I'm curious to see how this picture changes within the global context right now. It seems like the tariff situation and unpredictability in these markets is really throwing the industry for a loop. It's really an unfortunate situation, and as Pulse Canada, we're doing everything they can to try and make sure that we do what we can to make sure that our pulses have a home in these export markets. But this is the essential where our pulses go right now. From stats perspective, the numbers I say is about 80% of what we grow is exported to about 100 different markets. So, lots to consider, when we're shipping these pulses to all these important export markets. From work plans perspective here at Pulse Canada, we tend to put this into two different buckets. Our market diversification, which is super important right now. So as some of these markets are obviously unpredictable, it's really important to make sure that we're at the forefront and exploring new markets, and we're seeing what works in previous markets and how that can be applied to new markets and emerging markets. So lots of work within Pulse Canada doing that. Then also the corporate affairs side of the team here, where it's really just kind of get rid of the market barriers. So, this could be anything from transportation to market access issues, and also the crop protection file kind of comes into here. So getting closer to the discussion today, I just really want to highlight the crop protection work plan. In the most simplistic terms, what we're trying to do, at Pulse Canada, or what I try to do every day, is to make sure that growers have access to products. In many cases, this is a real domestic focus. So again, ensuring growers have access to these products. It's really about the legislative and regulatory environment here in Canada. So the last session, Paul presented on the PMRA and all the potential challenges, or all the challenges that we are having with the PMRA and kind of what needs to be done there. Highly into those conversations, I participated in all in the PMRA consultations, all the working groups. I'm a member of the Pulse or the Pest Management Advisory Council. So really making sure that the pulse growers are represented and create a favorable the regulatory environment here in Canada. Also trying to make sure that, non-science-based decision-making doesn't prevent new products coming to market. I think this is something that we didn't think was an issue for here in Canada, but, when we did see, the MRL pause within the PMRA, kind of came to the forefront that, there are some political aspects that are sneaking into our regulatory environment that we just don't accept. So we're trying to make sure that, we remain to our core and remain to a science-based decision-making process here in Canada. On the flip side of that, we get access to some good products. We want to make sure that growers can actually utilize them. And this is really comes down to making sure there's no trade concerns. So what does this mean? We're trying to look at the trade facilitating, approach in our export markets. So how to make sure that all of our export markets are utilizing risk-based criteria, are predictable, and again, have these trade facilitating policies in place that we can actually export into those markets. And then what can we do to make sure that there's zero MRL non-compliance or market acceptance issues with the use of these products? And I'll also get into the presentation in terms of, what does that mean? How are we approaching all this? So quickly touching on kind of the export market policies that's driving a lot of the uncertainty in terms of crop protection products and kind of where some of these MRL issues are popping up from. Just going to focus on the EU here. So if we had this presentation 3 years ago, this is the slide that would have been up. In 2020, the EU announced their EU Green Deal. It's kind of their framework in terms of how the EU is going to become sustainable, what they're going to move towards. And then also the farm to fork strategy. When they announced this in 2021, there was lofty goals, reducing the overall use and risk of pesticides by 50%, moving to organic agriculture on 25% of their acreage. Big kind of goals that really didn't match with reality. So what we saw is there's a lot of pushback in the EU for good reasons. From the concern from our aspect is that if the EU did go ahead with some of this stuff, if you're going to reduce the use of pesticides by 50%, what that means is pesticides are going to be removed from the market. And obviously, if a pesticide is removed, that's where you get the MRL concern, where MRL could fall to a default level. So big concerns with that. However, running up to an election in the EU, they kind of backtracked some of the stuff. It didn't move forward. So now that the election's over, they got a new mandate in the EU. All the parties kind of in the EU became the farmer party. They recognized that they need to bring the farmer voice along with them if they're ever going to, get a mandate in the EU. So what we see now is their newest initiative. It's called the EU Vision for Agriculture and Food. So they just launched this in February of 2025, so a couple months ago. It's just the framework in terms of what they think is the new, or how they're going to attempt to address these types of issues, their path forward. And while there's lots to work with, we appreciate the framework. We'll express that there's quite a bit of concern in here too. So even though we don't have the big targets about 50% reduced, reduction in pesticides, things like that, what we've seen is there's a lot more of a protectionist kind of environment in the EU, and this is relevant for the global context too. But things that we see within the trade policy, such as the emphasis on reciprocity and alignment of production standards for imports, I think this poses a lot greater concern than a default MRL, where you start to bring mirror clauses into the conversation. What a mirror clause is essentially you trying to match, your inputs must match whatever the production standards are in the EU. So if a pesticide is banned or you can't use a product in the EU, essentially a mirror clause would say, you must confirm on your import that product has not been used either. So you kind of remove that regulatory MRL aspect where even though if you can meet or show that you can meet a default MRL, it kind of throws that out the window where now you're forced to show that you just didn't use that product. And that would cause a lot bigger concerns. So lots to look out for there, lots of work to do. You get into some of the other policy types of approaches where, around the pesticide environment, where they're saying they're going to ban the re-import of products or they're going to restrict the export of products that are banned in the EU. So we do know there is manufacturing of pesticides in the EU. So what they're essentially saying is that, for any product that has been removed from the market in the EU, they're going to say that you actually can't export that product if it's manufactured in the EU to a third country. Lots of concerns there. And then food safety, just language around establishing a task force for enhanced import control measures. So to me, this just reads that, there's just further regulatory uncertainty in terms of how they're going to test for products or imports, or just heightened awareness in terms of making sure that you're compliant going into this market. So lots to look out for. I'd say lots from a trading aspect, lots to be concerned about. But again, we're very early stages, and PulseCAD and other industry members are actively engaged on this file to try and make sure that we have a facilitated environment in place. So moving on to kind of the zero MRL non-compliance aspect of the work plan, and what we're doing to try and meet that. First off, and pardon if you've seen all my presentations, I always take a slide to explain what an MRL is to make sure we're all on the same page. But in simplistic terms, MRL stands for Maximum Residue Limits. It's the maximum amount of pesticide that's expected to remain on a food product when the pesticide is used according to label directions. So That last part is the most important part. It's based on label and directions. It's why when we say follow the label, it's really related back to this MRL piece so many times. It's not a measure of food safety. Even though food safety is considered during the establishment of an MRL, food safety is not a factor into what that MRL level is. That's not what it's meant for. It's strictly meant to facilitate trade. It's for trade purposes. The kicker here, and what we need to pay attention to as a farm and as industry when we're so export dependent as Canada, is that even though we have our MRLs established here in Canada, it's really the MRLs in our export countries that we need to pay attention to, as that's the MRLs we will need to meet if we are exporting into those markets. So that's kind of what we need for MRLs. I want to touch on quick terms of what is the impact of an MRL non-compliance? We really don't talk about this. So we talk about the importance of being compliant and trying to avoid these types of issues, but I just want to give a flavor of what it means if you end up on the wrong side of an MRL. So the first example is the European Union. So with this markets, we see a big difference in terms of the difference between a regulatory non-compliance and a commercial non-compliance. So by regulatory non-compliance, what I mean is if your product is entering into the EU, it has to clear customs, something like that. If it gets held up there, if there's testing at that standpoint and it becomes non-compliant, that's a regulatory non-compliance. It's regulatory, testing that's been done, and that's the holdup. Commercial non-compliance, which is a lot more common with the types of issues that we may see pop up, is the importer or the buyer itself in the EU is doing the testing. So they have their own quality assurance programs. They're making sure that the product they're receiving is compliant with the EU law. They don't want to end up taking a product and putting on a food shelf or selling into a grocery store and having that product show up as being non-compliant or something like that. So what we're seeing a lot in the EU is that the customers themselves are doing the testing, and this is called a commercial non-compliance. So what I want to get across here is that assume all customers in the EU are doing this testing. So every product that's going in is being tested. And if you exceed it, essentially EU regulation states that the product cannot be placed on the market. So you can't blend it, you can't do anything with it, you can't, somehow blend it off with other products. Essentially, their hands are tied where they cannot take this product. So what that means is that product is destroyed, it has to be re-exported to another market, or it's returned to Canada. The impact of that is dollars. It's extremely costly if you're the exporter that's in the situation. And it's damaged reputations. These are trusted, relationships that's built over many years. And if you're in one of these situations, it takes a hit. The other one I want to highlight real quick is the United States. So from the U.S. perspective, in my view, this is probably the most scary non-compliance situation that an exporter could be in. So what happens in the U.S. is that imports are subject to random testing at customs. It's a risk-based kind of approach in terms of how they determine, what that is. But essentially, if you're found to be non-compliant or offset with an MRL, what happens is that export is placed on under an import alert, which means all future shipments from that exporter will be detained without physical examination. So what that means is that it just gets detained and it can't clear. If you're on this list, it's just detained. It's extremely challenging to get off this list. So while you're on this list, it essentially means you can't serve the US market. To remove yourself, you have to submit a petition. It's a formal process. You have to submit a petition to the FDA outlining, how you identified the source of the problem, what your corrective actions are, how you've essentially fixed it. Once you kind of get that and, FDA agrees, yeah, that's sufficient, then you have to ship 5 consecutive shipments into the US. Those shipments have to be separate. They can't be, one lot split up 5 different ways. It's 5 distinct shipments. They all have to be tested by a trusted lab by the FDA. Those test results have to go back to the FDA to be approved. And if compliant, that shipment clears. Once you do that 5 times, then you can petition again to try and get yourself off this list. What we see is that typically this involves a lot of lawyers, and it usually takes at least a year to go through this process. So imagine your company, your exporter, and the US market is big for you. This could sink a company. This one non-detection could sink your company if you're all of a sudden can't service the US market just because of a single MRL non-compliance. So this is what we mean about the importance of making sure that we're compliant with MRLs, the export markets. These are the type of implications that exporters could be dealing with if they're running on the wrong side of an MRL. So in terms of, what are we doing to manage this risk? I like to break this down into kind of a short, medium, long-term approach. The short term is just, we understand there's a potential issue. Can we communicate it so that folks are aware of it and trying to avoid it? It's not the situation we want to be in, but I think it's the best we have. If we know of an issue, okay, let's just talk about it and make sure that we do what we can to avoid it in the short term. These are things like, we're trying to review the market risk, trying to stay on top of MRLs, utilizing the Keep It Clean program to communicate that out to farmers and industry, and also trying to reinforce or implement kind of robust quality assurance programs so we have a good understanding of what the residues are and where the potential issues are, things like that. So that goes in that short-term bucket. Medium term is if we know there's an issue, working with the relevant product registrants to get an import tolerance in place or address that gap in that export market. I appreciate all of the registrants here in Canada. They're super helpful to work with. They're more than willing to get these gaps filled. Just knowing how important it is in the industry to make sure that we're able to access the export market. So kudos to all the registrants that put in the time to fill these gaps. And then the long term is really that big picture. The MRL policies within our export markets can be challenging. So what can we do to make them more simplistic? What can we do to get to harmonization where we're not relying on multiple different MRLs in all these export markets? And this takes a big team. It's a slow path. It takes a lot of work. It's a long-term play, but it's something that needs to keep going, need to keep on to make sure that, we're not putting out these short-term communications. We need these long-term solutions. So delving into a bit of that short-term buckets and kind of where as retailers we come into this, we help the process we do to try and determine a market risk is defined. As an industry, we're open and we talk about this and we come together as industry to try and figure out how do we actually determine what the market risk is. And this is kind of put into a 3-step process where it's really to identify your markets. What are the markets that we need to worry about? So from a pulse perspective, I don't need all 120 different markets. I want to know what the big ones are. And, so try and identify what those are. It's only a handful that we usually do. It's like US, Codex, EU, Japan, China, South Korea. Basically, countries that set MRL policy or have MRL policies that are really influential on other export markets. These are the type of countries we look at. The pesticides of interest, it's really trying to identify what pesticides have residues that could be a trade problem. Again, I don't want to look at all the registered pesticides on the market, trying to filter down what is it we actually need to determine or really dig into. And then try and figure out, what is that level of risk? And that kind of filters into a categorization process. So when we talk about risk, what goes into the risk potential, there's multiple factors that can go into it. What I want to really focus on is 3 different things, really. Like when you look at the likelihood of residues, essentially what we're trying to figure out is, does this product even have detectable residues or not? So if the product has no residues when it's based according to label directions, don't need to worry about it. If there's no residues, you can't exceed an MRL. It's that simple. If there are detectable residues, then we're trying to figure out, okay, when does that actually come into play, how we use this product in the market, but also what other factors within the grain industry can maybe mitigate that risk. And this is where the transportation method could come into play. Our grain handling system is really robust, and it's quite robust in the sense that it can work in our favor in some cases, but also work against us. So if you have the opportunity to bulk your grain, solution is the dilution, as many people say, that can get rid of a lot of problems. But if you don't, and unfortunately pulse is kind of in that bucket, especially special crops too, where if your crop goes out by container, you can't rely on that. So your risk level all of a sudden comes up a bit more. And then thirdly is just looking at the regulatory system in our export markets. Is it really defined? Do they do a lot of testing? So something like the EU, where you just assume everything's being tested, kind of less risk averse in that situation where, potential problems can pop up. Or you're going into a market where, that level of testing maybe just isn't there. Okay, maybe you could be a little more risk averse in that type of market. So all the factors that come into play. Not going to spend too much time on this, just reinforcing that point that, there's multiple different ways that, products can move. From a pulse perspective, though, just reinforcing the point that, we do rely on container shipments. So the stats here, 50% of our lentils, 30% of our peas, 100% of our beans and chickpeas, all by container. So this is where we try and take a more focused look in terms of ensuring that, we can't rely on that bulking and dilution to get us out of these problems. So the message there is a single farm actually does matter. a single farm can end up in these containers. So it's why it's important that everyone needs to take these things seriously and work together to make sure we're avoiding these types of situations. So when we look at the MRL policies or export markets, this is what I mean, how things can vary. It's a dog's breakfast in terms of, when you spread this out across 120 different markets, it could be very different. And this is that long-term play where we need to bring kind of our markets together and kind of solve it. So it could be a situation where there's MRL lists, no deferral, but you have default MRLs. Those default MRLs can change. I'm going to skip this slide, just highlighting the point that these things change is something that kind of plays into the market. I will highlight though that, Paraguay, it's not a major pulse market, but I think when we look at what that long-term goal is, Paraguay is the perfect example of the type of markets that we're looking at. They have a national MRL place, but what can avoid these market access issues with the MRL issues if you have a proper deferral pathway in place? So Paraguay, if you don't have an MRL, they defer to Codex, this international standard. That can replace a missing MRL. They've even gone far enough to say that, okay, if there's no Codex MRL, then we're going to go to the EU. So now you have kind of two backstops to make sure that there's an MRL to look at. This is good policy. This is what we want all of our exports to look at. And I bet if every market had this type of policy in place, 99% of our MRL issues would disappear. It's kind of what we need. In terms of this year, so we get through that process, we get categorizations, and then unfortunately, there's certain situations where we have to communicate products to the market. This is not what we want to do as an industry. It's not our intent to try and show, limit farmers' use of products. But at the end of the day, there are potential MRL issues with some of these products. So for pulses, there's three kind of groups of products that we're communicating this year. The first one, new for this year, and I'll touch on this in the next slide, is flunicimid, so the product carbine, the insecticide carbine that just came to the market. We do have some communication and potentially restrictions on green lentils for this year, and I'll get on that to the next slide. Glyphosate, this is long-standing. If you're familiar with the product advisory, it's the same message. From a glyphosate perspective, we do have MRLs established in all of our export markets. It's not about an MRL issue. This is about the market acceptance issue. I think we can all appreciate some of the challenges that we have with glyphosate in the marketplace in terms of, is it accepted, is it not accepted, things like that. And it's just the fact that we need to communicate or you need to be aware of potential restrictions or potential buyers that may be restricting it in that situation. If you are using glyphosate, it's all about proper use, proper timing. And, I've seen the evolution over the years since I've been here at Pulse Canada, that message is getting across. I think farmers can be proud of how they use this product and the fact that it is being properly used on farm. So there is good progress there. Last is glyphosate ammonia, is desicant, and really there's quite a few moving parts to that. But I think if you're going to take one thing away, it's just the fact that glyphosate cannot be used. It is not a desiccant in pulse crops, full stop. We do have a situation in Alberta, in Ontario, where there is registration on dry beans, and there's a single market where that it can be used. It's Azuki beans going into Japan. That's the only market class. Other than that, it cannot be used. So there are no MRLs in place. That's the main reason. So that example of the United States, where if a company can be, found non-compliant going into the US, with this missing MRL, that's the situation that's could face an exporter if that situation. So that's why it's so important not to use this product. Again, have more slides coming up. So touching quick on flunicimid, kind of what you need to know this year of what we're trying to communicate. The reason why this came onto the advisory for this year is just due to the uncertainty with the MRL in the EU and green lentils. I want to make it very clear this is a green lentil issue only that we're talking about. Part of that uncertainty lies with the residue definition, or you should be aware that the residue definition is different for different export markets. So from a North American standpoint, it's the parent chemical. So when we talk about the parent, that's flunicimid. And then metabolites. So there's 3 different metabolites that we're testing for this product in Canada: TFNA, TFNA, AM, TFNNG. For the EU, it's different. It's that parent flunicimid plus 2 different metabolites. And this results in different MRL values in export markets. So different MRLs, it's explained by the difference in residue definitions, but that's why you can't just look at MRLs in export markets, assume it's equal. You got to look at these factors too. And then finally, any export market that utilizes a Codex MRL or bases their MRLs off Codex, it's just flanicid only. So there are no metabolites. So this is the complexity that kind of goes into the MRL setting process that can cause, headaches or concerns too. But in terms of this one, though, I just want to highlight that we are working closely with the product registrant. This is ISK and the distributor FMC here in Canada to address this uncertainty. So we should get some answers this growing season and hopefully get this resolved really quick. But just want to highlight that it's uncertainty with the EU MRL right now. That's why this is showing up on the advisory. So that being said, if you're working with a buyer that's heavily reliant on the EU market, you may get requested not to use this product. And in that situation, we'll just suggest to utilize an alternative product on green lentils if you're in that situation. So being an insecticide, obviously this is very highly dependent on if we get aphids blowing up from the south. So if we have no aphids this year, it shouldn't be an issue. But, if aphids do come up and you're in a situation, just be aware that there are potential market restrictions for green lentils if we're serving the EU market. Just to highlight or reinforce the point why green lentils, when you split out the market classes between red and green lentils, again, don't get too caught up on the specific tonnages itself. The graphs are different. It's really the proportions. So when we look at the red lentil market, EU is not in the top market share. We're down to 1.2% of the red lentils going to the EU, just as averaged over 2020 to 2024. However, if you look at the green lentils, it's much different. 10% of the green lentil market goes into the EU market, so it's much more important. So that's why it's the focus between the two market classes. So this is that balancing aspect. We're trying to make sure that tools remain available to growers based on that risk potential. So this could have easily been just don't use it on lentils, but it makes no sense. Makes no sense to restrict its use on a market class of lentils that isn't subject to the same risk as other market classes. Glyphosate ammonium. It's a simple message. Do not use it. That's the message. It's even though we have this generic registration for lentils, it's historical. It's there. Farmers technically can use it. There are no MRLs in any of our export markets, whether it's a US, Codex, European Union, whatever the market is, there's no MRLs. So it's just prime for potential market access issues. So please don't use it. Any crop, lentils, peas, chickpeas, whatever it is, dry beans, don't use it. Again, this Eastern Canada piece I touched on earlier, there is a specific case where if you talk to a grain buyer and if you fall in that bucket, obviously it's good to use. But, the assumption there should be, again, just don't use the product. So how can industry help? Here's our potential market access issues. Here's what we're trying to communicate. How as you, as agri-retailers and agronomists and, boots on the ground can help in this situation. I want to just highlight a slide. So as Keep It Clean, we do market research every 2 years. We try and ask farmers kind of what, how they use products, what their understanding is, but also trying to understand, where they get their information from and where the trusted sources are. And this should be no surprise to anyone. I think I've seen similar research come out of the organization, that reinforces this. But as agronomists and retails, you hold a lot of leverage in terms of the trusted advisor piece within the industry. So farmers trust you. They look to you to get the relevant information and good information. So this is why I'd love to build this relationship out, with this network to extend this messaging. We can only communicate so far, but if we partner on some of these, this messaging gets a lot stronger and we can work to try and mitigate a lot of these risks just by communicating those potential risks that are out there and proper use of these products. So I want to highlight something that's new for this year. So as Keep It Clean, we are looking to partner with industry partners. I guess we're looking for industry partners to help extend this messaging. So if you have an established communication network, say you have an e-newsletter or a newsletter that goes out to individual growers or anything like that, or your kind of farm network, we'd love to work with you. So we're setting up a dedicated mailing list for kind of folks just like that are looking to extend the messaging. And what we're going to do is kind of package up this Keep It Clean, messaging into easy to use type an easy to use format that you can just simply copy paste into an email. You can, get some social graphics to put it online, whatever that might be, whatever you need. We're setting this up so you can extend this messaging to your networks. So we're all on the same page in terms of trying to mitigate these risks. So I wish I had a sign up code here right now. It's currently being developed. So the best I can do is simply just reach out to me if this is, super interested, if you want to help extend this messaging, get this messaging out. I'd love to have you sign up for this type of stuff to help extend that messaging throughout the growing season. Things that we have that can be useful, or if you're looking for types of resources to help communicate this type of information, here's 2 fact sheets that we have. Obviously this glyphosate messaging, or this issue that we have within the industry that we want to communicate. I have a full fact sheet on it, 1-page print. You can print it off. We can provide this. Actually, it's going to go out to you after this in an email. So we can make this available. We also have fact sheets in terms of keep it clean in general, in terms of, what you can do, what farmers can do, and the industry can do to help mitigate these risks. Use those except pesticides only, read and follow the label, things like that. Again, these resources are available. Also highlight too, from a shareable content standpoint, we do put this information on the Keep It Clean website. So if you haven't visited the Keep It Clean website, or if you're not familiar kind of with the website, we do have a shareable content and graphics tab up here, and you can download these social figures. If you see something there that you wish you usually had, or it's not there, you think would be helpful, reach out to us, we can create something. But these resources are there to communicate, to get this message out. So if you're not aware of it, it's on the Keep It Clean website, and highly encourage you to check that out. And then finally, if you're on the call early enough, we were talking about the Keep It Clean Product Advisory webinar. So we do have a webinar coming up. It's April 24th, 11 a.m. Central. You can register at keepitclean.ca, and I can put the link in the chat here too if folks just want to register right away. I promise you, it's not going to be a duplication of the information today. I'm not gonna, definitely want you to go and check out, sign up for the webinar. There's information from cereals, from canola, things like that. So head to the website, sign up for the webinar, and hopefully see you on that one too. So with that, I have try and copy that webinar link one more time, and I'm not going to, so I'll get in later. But anyways, open to questions, look forward to the conversation. And then here's my contact information. So send me an email, give the office a call, where they're willing to chat.
That's great. Thank you so much, Greg. I've had the opportunity for the last year to talk to you about all of these issues, these topics, and the critical, time-sensitive almost ability to get the information out. So Keep It Clean's a great website, and if others are definitely wanting to sign up and have direct information come out from Keep It Clean, so you don't have to wait to get it through CARE or through other organizations, we do send it out as well on behalf of CARE to our members and to our industry people who get our newsletter every 2 weeks. So that's great. But yeah, that's fantastic that you have the link in the chat now. Is that what I'm seeing?
Just got in there now.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
2 links now. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we have any questions, I don't know if we want to stop sharing the screen. Perfect. And then we can see faces. So if you have a question and you want to raise your hand, definitely do that, because then we'll be able to see you and be able to spotlight you. Maybe if you would like to turn on your camera, if you can. If you can't, that's fine too. But if you can turn on your camera and ask, we have the expert in the room with us. And so it's great to be able to ask direct questions, whether Greg covered it specifically or you need a little bit more information or something a little bit different. It's now your turn. So we have about 20 minutes to just have a really engaging conversation. If not, I was going to ask you, you talked, Greg, specifically about pulses, obviously Pulse Canada, but if there's some of the other grains and cereals, are we able to find all that information on Keep It Clean? Or I'm just going to ask you, because I know you're on the Keep It Clean board group, should we be doing this with some of the other like Cereals Canada, experts as well?
Yeah, no, Yes. So the Keep It Clean program is that partnership between, Pulse Canada, Canola Council Canada, Cereals Canada, and then the Prairie Oak Growers Association too does participate to get the old information in there. So that's where it kind of stops. So even though we represent Pulse special crops, there are issues that we should talk about in mustard and things like that. It doesn't make the Keep It Clean kind of formal communication. That being said, obviously a lot of these messages or tips that we have in terms of using acceptable pesticides only or follow the label and manage your disease, things like that's relevant across the farm. So you can apply it to multiple crops. But for sure, I highly recommend if you have questions on cereals, questions on canola, reach out to those organizations. They're all great resources and able to answer those questions too, and provide the perspective from their different different types of market access issues that may be within those crops too.
Oh, that's great, Greg. When we talk about I'm going to keep asking questions until I get some hands raised here. So someone help me out and put a few questions in. Oh, there. Do I have? Oh, are some going into the chat? And I need to look at the chat. Maybe that's.
Got a couple in the chat coming. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So, my question is from Mustafa is how frequently do MRL regulations change and what are the best strategies for staying updated? And then there's a second question. So
yeah, so they don't change fast. Let's say that. So MRLs themselves, I get MRL updates every day. So I subscribe to a database that helps kind of manage or kind of filter all this information into a single spot for all of our export markets. And I get change reports. So I get notified every time there's an MRL change on all of our pulse crops and all of our different export markets. That change report comes daily. I get daily changes of MRLs. Most of them aren't relevant though. I'll say that. A lot of them for active ingredients that don't matter. Maybe it's a simple alignment with, codex or just juggling numbers around, things like that. I'd say, regulations that have a meaningful impact to the industry, this could be a couple of times a year. It really depends. So when we look at a market like the EU, it really depends on kind of the backlog in terms of the reevaluation. So similar to how products are reevaluated here in Canada, for registration, it's looking at that work plan in the EU. And if a product's up for renewal, that's typically when you see these products kind of get knocked off the list and kind of, get removed from the market. And then the MRLs would fall too. So they change more frequently than we'd like to, but by no means is it all the time. So it's something that's bound to keep an eye on, but it's a lot to say nothing.
So, yeah. So, Greg, you're getting those, and I don't think everyone has the time to get that type of information. So, the second part of that question, before we get to the second question, is how best to stay updated. Should they be going to a website? You're going to just put things out there that are critical, right? You say a lot of them are really not relevant on a daily basis to get out. So what's our path in Canada to get that information out to the retailers so they can tell the growers or so the growers know?
Yeah, so this is essentially why the Keep It Clean program was developed, because it is unrealistic to think anyone has time to go through all these W2 notifications and MRL changes and trying to figure out, does this impact me, does it not, things like that. Because again, a lot of times when an MRL falls, we've been able to show that we can still remain compliant with how that product's used in Canada. There are situations where there's a default MRL on the EU, but we still use that product in Canada. So the recommendation is follow Keep It Clean, keep in touch with Keep It Clean in terms of what's being communicated. And I think it should reinforce the fact that when you do see that communication come out through Keep It Clean, we are trying to communicate the things that we know are potential issues. So pay attention is kind of the message.
It's not just sending out noise to fill an inbox. There's something specific coming that they need, a piece of information.
Yeah. But again, anytime though, if you have questions, reach out to the commodity associations. All the commodity associations have folks that are kind of trying to keep on top of this. So if you don't find out Keep It Clean, if you have questions, that's where you should go. Reach out to them.
And Greg, are those going directly from Pulse Canada, for example, to then each provincial grower association, so that then they're getting it out to their members, their Pulse growers as well?
Yeah, so any of this messaging kind of in Keep It Clean, the grower member associations are amazing partners in that. So we recognize, and if you saw that slide where I showed the great benefit that retailers have in terms of the trust,
Yeah.
provincial organizations have that too, but it's just not as much. But regardless,
Right.
they have those connections. They're that one step closer to the farm. So that's where absolutely rely on them to communicate out. And then as Pulse Canada and through our trade organization, the Pulse and Special Crops Trade Association, we need to get that information out there too. Because it's not helpful if just farmers know about this. And then if we're directing them to go talk to your grain buyer, which a lot of times what we do because it so much depends on the market, the grain buyers have to know about this information too and understand where that risk is too. So, yeah.
And that's great, Greg, because what I was trying to get at is the growers are sometimes getting at the information. Their email inboxes are full as well. But we want to make sure the ag retail, the agronomists and the independent agronomists and those are getting that information. So whether that be through others, like other channels, or our member insider will be going out to make sure that that gets to our care members, right? So that those ag retails have that information. So we have another question here. How should exporters manage supply chain traceability to ensure all products meet MRL standards?
Yeah. Lots to consider. I'd say that the first step though, and this is what I recommend to all of the experts I talk to is just start testing. Like if you don't have a quality assurance program in place where you have a baseline understanding of what these residues are, like we're going to run into problems. So recommend everyone, that's exporting to get some baseline understanding of what is the product that you're exporting, what are the residue levels for that. It's not just MRLs. I didn't bring in the heavy metal aspect to this, but similar to pesticides, heavy metals have limits too that are being established for markets, and we're seeing a lot of challenges with EU and metals too, especially on pulse crops. So you just need to know what you're exporting. So that's the first step. Any opportunity to try and track in terms of what that lot is that's being exported. Can you go back to a farm level with that? And a lot of exporters do have that detail. There's cases where, I've been notified, that member has been able to determine, okay, this is what went into that lot. Here's the X number of farmers that made it up to them. Go back to them, determine what was used. Like that's the level of detail that a lot of the exporters have right now. So if you really want to have that gold standard in terms of managing as an exporter piece, it's that baseline testing and that traceability to be able to go back and track your product if problems do arise.
So Greg, Sherilyn has a question that kind of leads or builds into some of the other things we've already been talking about, but how can we more widely get the information into the hands of the growers and the agronomists so that they can better understand the implications and know the implications for the buyers. So, but also what would you like to say, Greg, to this group? I know you've been talking to this group, but it's like, as an ag retailer and agronomist, what are some of the key questions that they should be asking their farmers before they're advising on certain things? Or,
yeah, I think it's like, to me, it's just about awareness. Like, I think we've done a good job of creating this material and maybe trying to get it out there. I'm not sure we've been effective as we maybe could be in terms of tapping into these networks. So, when I talked about trying this new initiative of creating this kind of network of shares, essentially, like I think this helps extend the messaging. It's not realistic to think that someone like me here in Winnipeg is able to tap into all the different, farmer networks and get this information out. It's just too difficult. But if we recognize that, the folks within the industry do have these connections in place, these communication channels already established, and I think we do as an industry appreciate, the need to get this information out and make sure that we're not causing these issues. So I think it's more a case of making sure that the information gets to where it needs to go. And part of that is making sure that the retails and the agronomists and whoever it is actually equipped with this information, ahead of time in a timely fashion. So when they are talking to their farmers and things like that, and, if there's a potential issue on a product advisory, that they know about it well in advance when they're making those crop plans, and can recommend that grower to go talk to their grain buyer or talk to that grain buyer on behalf of the grower to understand what the issue is, what it isn't, and then make those informed decisions. So I think it's just making sure that the information gets to where it needs to go in a timely fashion.
And I know I might be basic questions as a newbie to this whole area, but there are product labels that will say a product is safe in Canada to be sprayed on a crop. And I think you touched on this, whether it be pulses or others, but really you have to know your market that it's going to, because it may not be, right? Do you want to expand a little bit on that, or?
Yeah, so like, I mean, if you do actually do a deep dive into the Keep It Clean program, and we split it out into what we used to call the 5 tips, but essentially there's these 5 kind of key messages. The first one is use acceptable pesticides only, and that's meant to directly address that. It's the fact that, even though we have these registered pesticides here in Canada, you can use them on your farm, they're registered for use. I want you to use them. In certain situations, we just don't have the market situation or the MRLs in place to facilitate that use from an export standpoint. So that's the situation where, even though it's registered, if it's going to cause a market accident concern, that's where we need to communicate it and potentially limit that use. So not something we want to do, but that's essentially what leads into the product advisory and why we're so passionate about communicating this information.
Excellent. And we have a question from Rochelle. Rochelle, go ahead.
Hi, Greg. Can you go back on what you said about the change in the EU information that they're expecting that you just came out in February? You mentioned, I think I understood that you said that the farmers are going to sign off on, I only applied this material. So is that going to deal with drift like that? Is that going to eliminate our problem with drift that we constantly seem to have with pulses going into the EU?
Yeah, so make sure clarify some things, so I don't want to wrong quotes or anything like that. So yeah, the vision for agriculture is kind of their new framework in terms of what their vision is in terms of where they're going to go for within the EU on ag. It's very farmer focused, and that was kind of the result of all the protests and the new election, things like that. It's recognizing that you need to bring farmers along with you. One of the key irritants of the farmers is the fact that if they can't use products in the EU, then why are the imported products that they're bringing into the EU able to use those products? So they haven't done this yet, but there's a lot of talk of what we call about mirror clauses, and that's where I'm trying to explain that even though we're having challenges with default MRLs, and that's what's causing a lot of problems right now. If you go to a mirror clause type situation where you're no longer trying to hit a default MRL situation, now you're in the situation where you could potentially, again, it's not happened, but could potentially be having to sign off to say you have not used X product on the crop, regardless of residue level. That's where that discussion could go. It hasn't got there yet, but that's the worry, and essentially that's what keeps me up at night, is we are going to go towards there. So it's not about the farmers in the EU. It's just the policy that could come into place.
Okay, and now why is that keeping you up at night?
Because there's lots of products that we use that we've shown that don't have detectable residues, so we can comply with the default MRL. If you go to a mirror clause situation where now you have to sign off that you actually did not use that product, you're going to see a lot more products on that list where growers can't use it.
Interesting. Very very convoluted. Thank you for trying to explain that.
Yeah, so, and this is, I mean, another takeaway from the conversation today, and I think keep in your mind, is that things are changing. Like, I think we've seen it, over the past 5 years, where obviously the amount of testing has increased, a ton. You start to see potential restrictions coming from buyers more and more conversation about this. Again, just need to reinforce the fact that this is evolving. So our conversation next year could be very different than the conversation we're having right now. So it's something that we need to keep up on. Yeah. In terms of drift problems, I'd love to maybe have an offline conversation about that. If you have specific situations, let me know. Maybe provide a little more information on that if there's specific issues that you're dealing with.
Thank you. I'll probably email you probably in the next few weeks. Thanks.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks, Rochelle. We have a couple minutes left before we wrap up. Is there one more burning question out there, whether you put it in the chat or raise your hand? In the meantime, Greg, any final thoughts or something like, oh, wow, I didn't mention this, or that led me to think of X, Y, and Z, or, and it's fine if it didn't.
Yeah, no, the final thought was actually that things are changing. I think that's important, and just recognize that, we need to pay attention. Just reinforce the fact that I'd love to build partnerships here. Like this is really just about extending this messaging and make sure everyone's on the same page. So again, if you have this established communication network, if you're passionate about, trying to do all we can to maintain these market access and protect our markets and things like that, as Keep It Clean, we're trying to make this as simple as possible to communicate these messages. So it should be as simple as just copy and paste it, so you can, get this out to your communication network. So I know you're probably, if you're sending emails out, you're probably generating content. So let us develop the content for you and make your life a little easier and kind of,
Well, and
win-win for
Greg,
both.
that's a key piece, because I know a number of ag retailers might have 22 locations, they might have 40 locations. And so if you have it camera ready or print ready, they have newsletters that go out. And instead of them cutting and pasting and saying, can I, un-PDF that, whatever, right? So I think that that's great that you provide that, and that's important to let them know that they can send it out. So
Yeah, yeah, and we'll be getting, like, again, it's being developed, so we'll have that communication sign up piece shortly. So in the meantime, if this is something that interests you, or if you want to sign up for that, just get in contact with me, and I can happily facilitate that.
all right, well, I want to officially thank you. Oh, there's another question. Is there any financial insurance mechanism to protect exporters from the MRL related losses?
Short answer is no. There have been discussions about trying to develop an insurance framework in terms of, can you protect yourself from an MRL issue? As we saw, let's say 5 years ago when the EU was really going down the deep end in terms of revoking MRLs, things like that. Like it's big trade risk. That conversation didn't get too far because it gets very complicated very quick, and I don't think there's appetite to continue that. I think there's a need. I think that would help, ease some of the burden that maybe some of the exporters are maybe dealing with. But no, there's no buyouts, there's no insurance, there's none of that. It's really the risk that these exporters are taking on, and I think we need to appreciate that this can be risky business in certain situations. So, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I want to thank you in general, Greg, for joining us today and being so willing to be engaged in this type of a format and answer the questions that those attending had. So again, thank you to everyone, and I wish you all a really great day and look forward to doing this in the future and doing a repeat if there's something that comes up. Greg, you're more than willing to say, hey, let's get this going again. So
Absolutely.
All
I
right.
appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, all the best, and thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.